Hello, everyone, and welcome to our monthly expert Q&A sponsored by Amneal and Kyowa Kirin. I'm Katrina Call, the Executive Director of the Brian Grant Foundation. And as you know, our organization empowers people living with Parkinson's to lead active and fulfilling lives. If you haven't had a chance to visit our website at briangrant.org, I encourage you to do so after this webcast. We are now moving into the end of the year, and we still have 3 webcasts after this one. So join us the second Wednesday of every month at 12 p.m. Pacific time right here on this web page to watch our webcasts. We have the team from the Relay team coming up in October, and we also have Dave Iverson speaking about his book on being a care partner in November. But today, I am really pleased to talk to you guys and share with you our a very special expert Q&A session on the power of storytelling. Today, you will be guided through a discussion with Rani Sanderson, Canadian Projects Director of StoryCentre Canada. She's going to talk to you about storytelling and help you start crafting your stories. So with that, I am delighted to turn it over to Rani.
Hello, thank you. Thanks, Katrina. So I was preparing this presentation and I was trying to make my usual slideshow with all the bullet points of information. And I kept thinking, this is no good. This is boring. This is not really helpful. So I thought, since this is a presentation on storytelling, I should just tell you my story, and my story about actually how stories have helped me. Plus, I'll show you a few quotes that I like about storytelling on the slides. So here goes. This is my I'm going to introduce myself. Let me just get my slides going. So for years, this is how I've been introducing myself. My name is Rani. My background is in film and video. I worked in film and video for many years, and then decided to go back to school late in life for a master's degree in environmental studies, where I specialized and focused in environmental education, community engaged arts, and sort of social justice work, where I figured when I went in, I would probably make a film. And then I was introduced to digital storytelling by my supervisor, and that's how I got involved in digital storytelling, which I'll explain later what that is. And yeah, that's how I usually introduce myself when I give a presentation. But now I have this extra thing that I'm going to add on specifically, is that I have Parkinson's disease. I was recently diagnosed, or more specifically, I have young onset Parkinson's disease. As you will see me shake, because when I get nervous, as probably many of you know, I shake more, which ends up stressing me out, and then I shake more, and then that's just going to be me today. So you'll see me, my left hand shakes. So yeah, young onset Parkinson's disease, as I sort of jokingly say, yay, I finally managed to accomplish something young for my age, yay. But before I go any further, I want to read you something about why tell your story, and more specifically, why tell your story about Parkinson's. So this is from a book called Slender Threads by Pete Langman. Slender Threads is a young person's guide to Parkinson's disease. So bear with me while I read a couple pages of his book. This is the very beginning of his book. On such slender threads as these are we suspended, restrained, or mended, or something like that anyway. Looking backwards is fraught with danger, as the temptation is to remonstrate with oneself at length over a bad choice, over a missed opportunity, over and above any suspicion of self-congratulation for a difficult decision well made. Writing what is essentially a directed autobiography, the work which I am currently avoiding at seemingly all costs, and which has sent me into a frenzy of averbial apoplexy, is a dangerous thing for someone prone to such analysis. This book, A Young Person's Guide to Parkinson's, is in large part an attempt to create what I would have loved to have been able to read when I was diagnosed. I may very well not have liked it, let alone enjoyed it, but the idea of a work which traces its fingers over the outlines and creases which PD created and continues to create in one life would, I think, have stood me in good stead. The problem with it is simple. In writing it, I needs must retrace not only the outlines of the disease, but those of the ripples it sent and continue to send through my life. So that's my new friend, Pete. And I'll get back to more from Pete later. So on a recent trip to England, just back this past August, I bumped into an old friend. And when I told her I had Parkinson's, she immediately told me I must check out this friend of hers. He's had YOPD since he was 40. He's a writer. He wrote a book about YOPD, and he's a really interesting guy. After checking in with him, she gave me his email address. So I still wasn't too sure about all of this. It's all new to me, kind of. So, as is the way these days, I Googled him and I started to read his blog, and then I ordered his book. And I have to say, I was surprised to find it helped. Let's change slides here. See, I've been resisting any kind of support or talking to anyone else with Parkinson's. Right now, I'm okay. I don't think about it, and it doesn't depress me. So why would I want to speak to anyone who's more advanced than I am? So I can just hear about all these horrible things that are likely to come my way? No, this is not for me. And yet here I was reading this guy's blog and all the things about my future that may come, and I couldn't get enough. First of all, he's funny and smart and sarcastic and cynical. And this is a combination that's always worked really well for me. But also I was reading things almost word for word that live in my head. He was describing things in a way that were exactly spot on to my experience, and it was making me laugh. So I emailed him, and we've been emailing almost every day ever since. It's one email I actually look forward to seeing in my inbox. I find that reading his stories and sharing mine back with him, it all really helps. I know there's something in storytelling, in sharing personal stories with other people that can truly be healing, cathartic, therapeutic, community building, whatever you want to call it, or wherever you need it to be. See, I do this for a living. I help others share their stories. So I see it every day. So why wouldn't I do this for myself? Stories help you make sense of things. Stories allow you to figure it out. Stories can establish who you are at any given moment in time. And hearing someone else's story, a story you can relate to, can make you feel a little or a lot less alone. Even a story from a perfect stranger. Stories build empathy. Stories tell how it is. So what I do in my job specifically is something called digital storytelling, as I mentioned earlier. I facilitate workshops for people and communities from all walks of life, all ages, all abilities, to help them tell their personal stories in the form of 2 to 4 minute short multimedia videos. And I'll show you a couple soon. Let's see here. So this is my little chart for how people use these digital stories. But I could argue any kind of stories can be used for these kind of reasons. So we have like this personal reflection and growth. If I'm pointing to it, I don't know if people can see, but it's the red dot, which is just about looking back at yourself, processing your own life experiences and sort of seeing where you're going. Education and awareness is pretty obvious. You're going to educate people and bring awareness to an issue, a cause, anything that you care about, in this case, Parkinson's. Community building and mobilizing. Our workshops are small groups. I'm going to sort of tell you a bit more about what our workshops look like, but they're small group processes, and it's really great to come together in a small group and share your stories with people with similar experiences. It's a great way to build community and sort of mobilize, if that's what you're looking for. Policy and advocacy, people use these stories all the time to, show changes that are needed in policy and do advocacy work with them. And then a lot of people more recently are using them as research and evaluation. And a lot of these bubbles are obviously, they can go at the same time. They're not one alone. So a lot of people do them for multiple reasons. So, but I want to focus really is around the healing power of stories, which is probably more in that first bubble, that personal reflection bubble, or to be a little less, cheesy, dramatic, or woo-woo, why it's kind of nice to share personal stories and how they might help you. So, and there are a couple ways to look at storytelling from the perspective of the storyteller and of the listener. So as a storyteller, and this is based a lot on the StoryCentre methodology, which is called the 7 steps, which I'll show you in a few minutes. But one of them is owning your insights. So as per our 7 steps methodology, your insight is your sort of expertise on who you are and of your experience. It's what makes this story your story. How can you, there's something about sort of counterintuitively that if you think a story, a really general story is going to be more universal. It's actually the opposite. It's these really specific stories that are super personal and super detailed and unique to who you are is actually what allows people to engage in it more, and they become more universal. The more general the story is, the more arm's length it is, and the more it feels like you're not connecting and engaging with it. And then owning your emotions is very much about, giving you a chance to really reflect on how you feel about what's going on or has gone in your life and how to be authentic with those emotions. They allow, as a storyteller, you own your own narrative, take control of how you're represented as a person, as a community in this case, reclaim your narrative, tell it your way. in a way that is authentic to your own voice. I'm sure, I mean, there isn't a ton of representation about Parkinson's on TV or in other things, but often I see it's just like one very shaky person. And I think that there's a lot more stories to be had and shown in Parkinson's. It allows you to get things off your chest. It allows you to educate people on Parkinson's or whatever you're trying to educate people on. It allows you to reflect on your own life. Stories aren't just for teaching others, they teach us. And so we get to walk a mile in our own shoes. We get to know ourselves in a new way, a person we're always becoming, and we just don't take time to realize it. It's, you can use it in your advocacy work, as I mentioned, and it also helps you feel not so alone. And as a listener to a story, you get to learn something, you get to create some empathy, and you get to feel not so alone. But I'll come back to this in a minute. Right now, I think it's time to show you a story. So this is going to be Holly's story. This is a story about cancer journey. I don't have an actual Parkinson's story, but I think that these things are still relatable. So I'm going to show it to you, and then let's take a look at Holly's story. There we go.
I'm trying to stop rehearsing my way through life. I'm trying to stay visible. I'm trying not to mute my presence. I'm trying to be comfortable in my own skin. August 8th came with pink gowns, chemo, complications, and an incredible amount of support that I didn't know what to do with. I kept trying to write about it, but nothing really sounded quite right, quite like I felt. So much uncertainty about how I'd ever be able to tell each person who was helping me how much it meant, how much it helped. I felt guilty about receiving. I felt shame around how I looked and how I wanted to be able to still be around like I was before, always joking and smiling and giving and spending time. But I just physically couldn't do it. And then I read this quote by Mark Nepo, and it all started to make sense. It goes like this: "Only by accepting each other's pain and vulnerability can human strength grow between us. In these ways, receiving involves absorbing, inhaling, and accepting the life that flows through us, between us, and around us. These are all deeper forms of listening. On the surface of things, giving and receiving are about exchanges. I need you, you give, I feel grateful. You feel good about yourself. I feel indebted. I give back. We take turns. But below the resurface of things, giving and receiving become indistinguishable. And the aim is not to have more things from one person to another, but to keep the gift of life flowing." My partner went to Mexico a few weeks ago and collected little treasures from the beach, one for each day of radiation. I picked out one treasure every day after treatment. And I picked out the last treasure on Thursday.
All right, so these are the kind of stories that people in our workshops make. People who've never had experience writing or making videos make these beautiful stories. So we take them through this process. And this is really like, the stories, they're not showing people, they're not, pointing a finger and telling people a message. They're just telling people how it is, what it's like to be who they are. And, it's helpful to make the story. It's helpful for people to see the stories as well. And so back to being a listener, I think it's funny because as a listener of stories, it actually depends on who you're listening to. At the beginning, right after my diagnosis, about 2 years ago, in the work that I do, remember, basically, it's my job to listen to people tell stories. I kept hearing these stories about people whose elderly parents had Parkinson's. And let's be honest, they depressed the hell out of me. I didn't want to know how bad I might get one day. I didn't want to know that my loved ones are going to have to, go through this in the future when it comes to looking after me. And I didn't even want to think about the fact that I need looking after. I'm a pretty independent person. And the thought of needing to ask for care, oh my God, what a nightmare. So it was either that or I was being presented with almost like formulaic success or feel-good stories, these super positive chin up, you can get through anything kind of stories. And those annoyed me because I certainly didn't feel that way. And even more to the point, I hated feeling like I was being patronized. I know I have this disease, but especially at this point, I didn't feel positive about it. I didn't want to feel positive about it. It just sucked and I wanted to be allowed to feel that way. So I stopped wanting to hear anything about PD, which I did for a while. And while I understand how support groups can really help people, as I said earlier, it's not really my thing. Though I may be rethinking this as of recently, never say never. So my own way of processing my still fairly recent diagnosis, especially since time sort of stood still for those past 2 years of the pandemic, is to write a TV show about it. So I called up my cousin because we've been saying we'll write something together forever. And all in one go, told her my news. And even before she could have time to process it, I asked her if she wanted to write a show about it with me. And she said yes. So I'm taking this story into my own hands. And I'm writing this show. And it's going to be about a woman who thinks she has her whole life figured out and then gets diagnosed with YOPD. Or as my producer loves to say, something comes along to shake it all up. And yes, that does make me cringe. So obviously it's a comedy because, right from the beginning, I said, if I can't make fun of this, I won't survive it. And I get that might not just be me, but that's how I need to cope and process my things. You might be different and that's okay. And I don't even care if anything ever comes of this show. It's just been so cathartic to write it. It's like my therapy. It's all I want to do sometimes. It's been so much fun and it allows me to think through what's happening to me. And I can't believe I'm saying this about a progressive degenerative disease that looks worse every day in a fun way. And I am having fun. What I needed, I realized, was to hear the stories of someone like me, someone with YOPD. And so when it came to connect with this new friend, with Pete, who I mentioned earlier, I'd been writing my show for a while and I realized I hadn't really heard other stories of people my own age-ish who were going through this. And I wanted to get it right for me to see my experience represented authentically, fully knowing that everyone's experience with this disease is different. In my short 2 years as a PWP, and yep, I now get to be a PW, a person with, I've heard on several occasions, as I'm sure all of you have too, that quote, it's not Parkinson's disease, it's Parkinson's diseases. And quote, if you've met one person with Parkinson's, you've met one person with Parkinson's, which, make me cringe every time I hear them, but it turns out everybody says these things. I did read things in these blogs that were pretty awful things that were likely to come my way, but maybe because this blog and book were from an insider's perspective and not an outside observer, caregiver, doctor, it didn't bother me as much as those other stories. It helped. I do feel not so alone, I realize. I'm not the only one. I mean, I knew I wasn't and that this affects so many people, but here was someone who was experiencing this thing in a really similar way to how I was. And again, not everybody is going to experience it the same, but for some reason, this one I really connected with. And from what it felt like to get the diagnosis, to having to tell people about it and how to tell people about it, not to mention the reactions you get, all of them across the board, the meds, and just the day-to-day annoyances of having this disease, I get his sense of humor and I like his style of writing. Of course, I completely get that Pete may not be for everyone and you need to figure out what style of storytelling you like and connect with and what works for you, but this was working for me. Story is how we connect with others. whether it's within your own community or outside of it. Stories are universal. People everywhere tell them, historically have been telling them forever, and listen to them, of course, in so many different ways, in order to understand themselves, their communities, and the larger world. Stories are the best tool we have for understanding what it must feel like to be someone else. It's the closest we can come to being another person or taking a stroll in their shoes, so to speak. I think putting together a focused story, like a digital story, for example, can really help to explain things to other people. It's hard to know how to tell people about your Parkinson's, how to explain what it is, or even more, how to explain what it's like. So I'm going to read another little piece of Pete's book here. If I can find it, I marked it. Here we go. This is from sort of the middle of his book, in a chapter called On Placing Yourself in the Scheme of Things. There is a balance to be had. Everyone will tell you that you mustn't become defined by your disease, that you must hold on to your you-ness, and yet part of that you is now the disease. You can't hold on to your you-ness without Parky becoming at least part of the you that you want to keep. It's a bugger, and it's our bugger. As my condition has progressed, I found that I spent increasing amounts of time doing things to take the edge off the symptoms, avoiding things that remind me that I've got, or dealing with what it throws at me today. The fact is that this disease takes over your life, slowly but surely, invading every part of your body and doing funny things to your head. Yes, you need to watch your diet, and yes, you need to exercise, and yes, you need to be more careful generally when it comes to many things, but most importantly, you need to listen. Listen to what your body and your brain are saying. I know it sounds poncy, but it's so easy to get lost, to get swept away by the tidal wave of despair, anger, confusion, that you need to anchor yourself somewhere. And that somewhere is you. You need to retain as much self-awareness as possible, because you're truly all you have to rely on. All the PD support groups, the friends, the relatives, lovers, partners, not one of them can do a damn thing to help unless they know what is going on. I sent the first 4 chapters of this book to several people, including one of my sisters. She wrote the following, quote, "Just read first 2 chapters. I can't say I'm enjoying it. Well, perhaps I can because it's fluid, informative, and not patronizing. At least I don't think that it is. The bit I am not enjoying is the squirming feeling it is leaving with me as I am forced to confront the extent to which I have abandoned my little brother to himself without ever pausing to listen." Now, that may seem like an odd thing to quote here, perhaps even a little self-serving, but it's the second sentence that confuses me. It confuses me because I simply don't recognize this abandonment or this lack of listening. The truth of the matter is that I have not said much that might have been listened to, and no one's been given the chance to abandon me, as I pretty much hermetically sealed myself off from all and sundry other than in my blog. It's all down to how you react as an individual, how much you tell people, and how you're feeling about the whole sorry mess. There have been moments when I have. So when you have the chance to really think about it and craft your story, you can find a way to say what you really want and show people what it's like to be you. You can decide what and how you want people to tell your story. Tell your story to people. So now we're going to watch another story. This is Meredith's story. It's called Purple Bottom. Meredith has MS, which is probably the closest of all these stories to possibly a Parkinson story. And this is the story about a moment when it sort of really hit home for her what was going on. Oop, back up. There we go.
Awake in the dark, my thoughts are racing. Did I turn off the oven? I hope that meeting tomorrow goes well. Oh, I checked my watch. It's 2:46 a.m. and I have to pee again. Spasms race down my back as I struggle to push myself up from the bed. My left foot reaches for the floor. It's just a few steps to the hallway, but my feet are numb and cannot make the journey. The quicksand floor disorients me, and I fall. Landing hard, the swamp has turned to unforgiving cement. Bursting into tears of pain and shame, I realize that I cannot get up. I am stuck here. I thought I had more time than this. It's only been 4 years. 4 dizzy and exhausted years. 4 numb and tingly years. But a year ago, I needed a cane to walk. And tonight I can't even make it to the bathroom. I cry out for help, thankful for my husband nearby. He makes sure I didn't hit my head or break anything. He helps me to my wobbly feet and guides me down the hall.
So the beauty of the digital story actually is that you can also visually tell your story. And in my opinion, anyway, Meredith does an amazing job of not describing, but showing us when like sounding what like it might feel like to have MS. And she really just honed in on this moment. Like she's not telling us her whole life story, which is part of how we tell stories with StoryCentre in these little tiny contained stories. So a good story has power. It's got the power to inspire and move people to action. Good stories have the power to build understanding, change ideas, and teach. Stories can bring a face to statistics and numbers and humanize an issue, but most importantly, good stories have the power to be remembered. And when a story is honest and authentic, it can really move someone, make people feel something, not just know something. And working in small groups of similar people, whether it's a group of people with PD, for example, or a small, same backgrounds or ages or whatever the group is, it allows people to share their stories and really be heard. And it allows you to hear about other people's lived experiences. At our workshops, we practice what we call deep listening. So it's very much a give and take. You're going to share your story, but you're also really going to listen to other people and bear witness. Our workshops bring together small groups of 10 to 12 people in a safe space, or safest spaces we can handle and as we can create. And we work through a whole process of oral storytelling to the written word, to then recording it. And then we show people how to do the video editing, and people put these things together, all supported by their facilitators, but they make the whole thing. They take all the making into their own hands, and they make every choice about what they're going to say, how they're going to sound, and what they're going to show. Do they want to put their face in it? Do they not? How do they want to represent themselves visually? And we go through all these discussions throughout the process. And usually online, they're about 6 weeks. In person, we do them in about 3 days. So it takes that's how fast people learn how to do these. They're just really simple little story edits. I jokingly yet seriously say I've taught my mother how to do this, so I can teach everybody how to do it. So here's one more story I'm going to show you. This is about Sky's story about how she's got ADHD, and she really wanted to show what it felt like to be who she is and explain that to other people. So let's watch Sky's story.
Well, it's that time of day again.
Sometimes, letting go on a canvas frees myself of the need to make sense, to structure things in a way that other people are supposed to understand. The thing is, when you think differently from others, it can be hard to communicate. I'm on a different wavelength, so saying what I need to say gets lost in the mess of it all.
Attention projectionist. This chart will help you make sure that your picture will be focused properly before the show starts. Adjust the lens so that the bells in the corners and the 2 words are all sharply focused.
Not everyone thinks about how they think. Often we take for granted that our minds will take us where we need to go and guide us to what we need to do. Painting is one of the few places that my impulsivity genuinely thrives. Instead, to just let my mind wander and create something beyond the bounds of, shit, I left the fan on.
This impairs the individual's normal vision.
I think the hardest part of having ADHD is time blindness. I get stuck on things that grab my attention, and I don't have tolerance for what doesn't. I accidentally painted for 4 hours today. I have an assignment due. I always feel like there's so little time. My thoughts don't circle, they spiral, which is why I don't operate linearly. The clock always loops back to where it started, but I don't tend to look back on purpose. I never don't have something to do. I need to fill the space, for space to have meaning. A sense of urgency? I tend to find comfort in the chaos, but it can be hard to find a quiet moment.
And because of this may provide an illusion of relaxation.
So yeah, those are three pretty different stories visually about what, how people have chosen to share their experiences of what they're going through to show to the outside world. And these just really are our 7 steps that I mentioned earlier, the method that StoryCentre has developed. StoryCentre has been around since the early 90s. They're based out of Berkeley, California. As I mentioned earlier, I run the Canadian branch, which has been around since 2015, but they've over those many years, we've worked with thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people telling their stories. And these are the 7 steps. These are kind of just basically tips of what makes a good story. The first 2 I kind of already talked about, this owning your insight, that you're the expert in your own story. So write it, like I'm sure that, and our stories are extremely conversational in tone. We like to say that write the way you speak, because these should feel like mini conversations. They're not essays, they're not reports, they're not flowery kind of novels. They're just your life experience, the way that you are authentically to your voice and your experience. So your insight is that you're the expert in your own life, and there's no wrong way to tell it. You got to tell it the way that works for you. What are those little details that I said earlier that make it your story and not somebody else's story? Everybody experiences life differently, and I'm sure that you've been out with some friends and all experienced the same event and then told various slightly different stories on them, because you're all different people, and none of those are wrong. You're just different people with different backgrounds that you come into the experience with. You notice things. Some people notice what they see, some people notice what they hear, some people notice what it smelled like, etc. So what's your insight? What makes this story your story and nobody else's? And then the emotions that's actually what people connect with in these stories. The experiences may be unique to people, but emotions are universal. So everybody knows what it feels like to be happy or sad or scared or excited or lost or lonely, or, everything, feel joy, celebration. All of those things are universal. And if you're authentic in the way that you tell your story emotionally, then people will connect with your story and engage with it on that level. And as I said, these stories are 2 to 4 minutes on paper. They're under 400 words. You can't tell your whole life story in that many words. So we focus on a moment. So all of these have focused on one moment of some kind. And then you sort of hang your story on that moment, and then you can get all that context. And then if you're going to move into a visual kind of story, it's the seeing your story, hearing your story, putting all these things together and then sharing them. And it's just, we in our workshops, we talk a lot about, do you have music? Do you have sound effects? All of these things that are going to work together seamlessly to make your whole story make sense. How can some of the visuals do some of the talking for you? Because again, less than 400 words, sometimes a picture can speak 1,000 words, right? So how do you work with your images? How do you create a sense of place or a sense of feeling? And I think particularly in the last 2 stories, the MS story and the ADHD story, I think they both did an amazing job of like visually kind of showing us what it feels like, if that makes sense. So some more quotes. So yeah, in preparing for this presentation the other day, I asked Pete, my friend now, my new friend, why he wrote his books and his stories. And he wrote me back, and I quote, the big question, why? The initial impetus, especially for the book, was because I couldn't find anything on how diagnosis made you feel. I wrote the book I wish that had been there for me as I read at the time. So in that respect, partially altruism, partially a patriarchal, quote, I know what you need attitude. In general, I process and understand things verbally, and I stop thinking about it by bunging it down into writing. It's less healing than it is taking control of it intellectually and emotionally. My fiction in that respect has a cathartic aspect. In one book, I wrote a scene in which a 7-year-old child kills and skins a dog. I felt violated when I finished the whole thing. A year or 2 later, I realized I was taking revenge on a dog that almost killed me when I was young. A strange story in itself. The dog even had the same name, and I didn't cotton on at the time. Bizarre, no? I understand that having difficulty explaining things part. Another reason I write and wrote was this. If people asked, I could simply say, read my article in The Independent or anywhere. The problem people have with telling and explaining it to others is actually very simple to explain. They haven't worked it out themselves, and it feels really, really strange. Add to that the fact that a diagnosis with Parkinson's, most don't really appear ill or actually feel that bad, and the feeling that you're malingering, whinging, are being disrespectful to people who really are ill, and that's what everyone thinks when you tell them, is somewhat disconcerting. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of processing your own experience and coming to realize and putting things down on paper sometimes, or sharing stories with other people verbally, orally, can be really, really helpful to figure out where you've come from and where you're going with things. And here's one last slide before I close out. I just want to read this quote from Frederick Buechner in Telling Secrets. This is part of it right here. I've come to believe that by and large, the human family all has the same secrets, which are both very telling and very important to tell. They are telling in the sense that they tell what is perhaps the central paradox of our condition, that what we hunger for, perhaps more than anything else, is to be known in our full humanness. And yet that is often just what we also fear more than anything else. It is important to tell, at least from time to time, the secret of who we truly and fully are, even if we tell it only to ourselves, because otherwise we run the risk of losing track of who we truly are and fully are, and little by little come to accept instead the highly edited version which we put forth in hope that the world will find it more acceptable than the real thing. It is important to tell our secrets too, because it makes it easier that way to see where we have been in our lives and where we are going. It also makes it easier for other people to tell us a secret or two of their own. And exchanges like that have a lot to do with what being a family is all about and what being human is all about. And before I finish, I'm going to give Pete the last word again. And this is the final page in his book. I see myself in others. I see others in myself. I know others with PD, and I know that their symptoms lessen in my presence. And this happens in reverse too. A recent discussion on the subject concluded that considering stress seems to work to accentuate the visible symptoms of PD, there is a certain lessening of stress due to the fact that you know that the person you are with does more than merely empathize, more than merely understand. They know. This, I believe, is what helps more than anything. It's not the act of talking with someone who knows what it's like, though that in itself is quite a wonderful thing. It's simply feeling that you're not alone. Because if there's one thing I felt consistently since the very moment of my diagnosis, it's alone. When Kathy wrote in her notes in the final chapter, what was quite a wake-up call, that's a sister that I read earlier, was quite a wake-up call for me. All that time I'd spent feeling alone when all I needed to do was talk. All I needed to do was let people in, but PD made me feel so isolated. I was convinced that no one else could possibly understand. And of that, I'm right. But the disease is one thing. The way it affects you is another. PD brings a lot of big issues into focus, and it's these issues which your support networks can truly help with. So let them. If there's one reason why I've written this book, it's so that other PWP, and especially those newly diagnosed, their friends and family, know that they're not alone. And for me personally, listening to and sharing stories has really helped me on my own Parkinson's journey so far, and I know they will continue to do so. I'm suddenly more open to hearing and telling these stories, and I am suddenly not so alone. Thank you. And I'm going to pop Pete's book up here just so people can see it. This is the book, and we can share the blog also. And this is me if anybody ever wants to get in touch. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rani. That was a great presentation. I personally really enjoyed it. I really think this is an awesome topic. And thank you for telling your story and making it so engaging. We did have some questions. So the first one is, how do you help people find images for their stories? The images in Sky's story were impressive.
They actually create most of their own images. I think Sky shot all her own images in preparation for her story, we sort of talk through the ideas, and we talk about sort of a combination of what we call implicit and explicit images. The explicit are what I call matchy-matchy, they match what you're saying, and the implicit ones are those more implied, more metaphorical images that don't necessarily match what you're saying, but they go with what you're saying. And in Sky, she just took her phone. I mean, it's as simple as that. And she videotaped all those things. And she also found a whole bunch of, which is probably what maybe you're referring to, archival pieces that she found in the Prelinger Archive, which is an online website that it's in archive.org, I think it's called. There's a bunch of archives there that are free, open source, copyright free materials. So that's where she found a lot of her stuff. Plus the video editor that we teach on comes with stock media, but stock media does tend to look like stock media. So we always prefer if people find ways to create their own, because the more you make, the more that's yours, the more you own the whole story.
Yeah. We have been asked to, the name of the book again, please, Pete's book.
Yeah, can I hold it up there? Slender Threads. You can see how much I've marked it up. And I believe it's available on Amazon. And it's Pete Langman.
Pete Langman.
Yeah, Langman. I think that link I had in my slides. I don't know if you're going to share the slides out to people, but it's a clickable link that should take you to the Amazon page or the Goodreads page or something like that.
Yeah, clearly it's had a big impression on you, Rani.
Yeah, I mean, it really did make, I was really, honestly, I was really resistant to read it. And after reading a couple of his blog posts, I thought, okay, this guy sounds kind of like I sound. So I found it really helpful because I had been reading, as I'm sure most people who get diagnosed, newly diagnosed, go on the websites and they read like stories that people are saying and they're kind of dry and they're kind of depressing. But for some reason, his voice worked for me. And I get it. It's not going to work for everybody. He's very sarcastic and can be kind of rude at times. But that just, it felt authentic and it felt blunt and it felt like the stories I needed to hear. And this is all very new, like this all just happened to me in August, like early August is the first email that I emailed with him. So it's been just a couple months, not even. So yeah, I've been finding it extremely helpful. Honestly, it's the only email I want to see in my inbox some days. Not work related.
I think you speak to something we hear all the time, finding your community, finding the people you relate to.
Yeah,
is a very important part of the journey. And I think it's true for everyone, and particularly when you're diagnosed with a chronic illness. So, kind of going back to some of the things about the images or what have you, maybe step back and walk us through what does a workshop look like?
Yeah, our workshops, if we're looking at our online workshops, they're, and even the in-person ones are pretty similar. They're just broken down a little bit differently. But we begin by, just meeting each other, introducing each other with some low stakes stories, just fun little exercises and things like that. We show some stories like I just showed you, and we go through those 7 steps in much more detail. And we start to not pick apart, so that's a terrible way of saying it, but we start to sort of explore the stories through the lens of those 7 steps. So you start to feel like what makes a good story to you, because again, it's entirely up to every individual is going to be connecting with different things in different ways. So you start to see what you like, what you don't like, what's working more for you, and you start to shape your own story. And then we do, which is sort of the foundation of it, we do is what we call the story circle, where everybody gets a chance to share their story ideas. It's kind of like brainstorming is not the right word, but it's like a spitballing kind of session where you share your stories and you get some feedback. And we have guidelines around feedback. We have guidelines around sharing and all these things. And then you take all of that information and you put something on paper. And these ones, they're like 5 or 6 drafts in. Like these are not the first draft of writing that somebody does. It's a process. You get help from your facilitators. It's all one-on-one help in between sessions that we work with you. Or if we're in person, we work with you off in a corner somewhere. And we help you shape that script. And as I said, they're 350-ish words is usually kind of what a story, digital story script is. They're really, really short and focused. So we have a lot of tips of how to get there, how to craft it in that way to make it impactful and say what you need to say. And then we show you how to do audio recording. So people do their own audio recording. They can edit their audio and everything like that. And then, we talk about images. We talk about what kind of images work, how to take images. There's sort of a visual language that we all kind of come with, or we're so used to consuming media. So we talk a little bit about what those things, like how to represent things if you don't want to show certain things. Like, how do you show Parkinson's without, if you don't want to show somebody standing there shaking like a leaf, what other ways can you visualize it? And, or whatever the story is that you want to visualize. And then we teach some really basic video editing, and we provide people with the video editor, and they learn how to video edit, and they put it all together. And then at the end, we share all the stories at any stage, work in progress, finalized stories, whatever they are, in a screening with the group, and we celebrate everybody for all their hard work, and it's great.
It sounds great. It sounds really great. I want to encourage everybody who is on the webcast today to reach out to info@briangrant.org if that is something you think you would be interested in participating in. I'll also be following up with everybody that's registered to find out if people are out there that would really like to take a digital storytelling workshop with Rani and other people with Parkinson's, because I can imagine after that experience, people feel a lot of camaraderie with the other people.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a therapist or a social worker, so I can't claim that it's therapy, but a lot of people come out and they say that they have found it a very cathartic or therapeutic experience to go through. You forget sometimes, especially, actually it works online also, but people become friends in like such an intense way. Even in a recent in-person workshop I did that was with a bunch of women, one of them at the end said, "I can't believe I didn't know any of you 3 days ago." And I forgot that they didn't know each other because everybody had become like so close with each other in this short amount of time. It was pretty great. And let me also stress that, like, we work with people who have no experience video editing. I've worked with people who barely know how to turn on a computer, right? So this, like, we can teach all different abilities and levels of technical ability of any kind. So, and writing or anything, because these are really conversational. So we want you to just write the way you talk. Like, you don't need to be fancy writer person.
That's good. I love it. I mean, I think it's such an incredible thing that you do, and it's so cool to see it. And I can imagine, like you said at the end, that people really get to know one another, and that connection is as wonderful as the stories that are being told. One of the things I also really love about some of your project has been that you do bring advocacy topics to life. So I did remember, I believe it was I watched one that was on environmental pollutants.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was called Cancer Alley, but
the Cancer Alley stories. Yeah. A series of those. Yeah.
And it was interesting because it really told the story of pollution and what's happening in environmental problems through the stories of people living with the tolls of it. And I think that is also really amazing aspect of the work that you guys do.
Yeah, and I think that putting those bigger sort of advocacy pieces in a personal lens makes them more accessible to people. Like, what we have found anyways in our work is that people don't want to be told what to think. They don't want somebody pointing a finger and telling them, this is how you must do it. This is why, blah, 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 all these things. But if somebody just tells it like it's their story, this is how my version of it, this is my experience of it, then we can come along on that journey without that heavy-handed messaging, right? Like, people just get to be like, oh, wow, that's like impactful. That mattered to somebody. That made a difference. Or this is affecting somebody in a way that I didn't realize. It humanizes an issue.
That's great. And and again, there's a lot of things happening in the policy world around Parkinson's, including a national action plan that has just been introduced. And I think so there's a lot of ways that learning to tell your story in powerful ways can help advance some of those policy initiatives. We got another question, and it is, would you recommend this for people with advanced PD and cognitive decline dementia, people who have a lot of difficulty understanding the process?
I think there are still ways to make this work with people. I mean, as far as the dementia, they'd have to have a certain level of lucidity, obviously, to do this, but maybe they do it with a loved one who can work with them and sort of help them. Because I think from my dad has dementia, so I have a little bit of experience with that. And I think that the memories are still there, the earlier memories. And I think that I don't know how well he'd be able to tell it, but I think he would appreciate, he loves looking at photos and he loves like talking about some of the people in the older photos from his past. And I think that there would be a way to put it together. As far as if you're talking about Parkinson's with the physicalness of doing it, I'm not sure if that's what you meant by the advanced stages of Parkinson's. There are different ways that I've worked with people with other disabilities where they, you know, they're quadriplegic and they can't physically do the editing. So they work with their facilitator and make all the decisions, and we act as their hands, you know. Or some people, like I work with a young man fairly regularly who can't use most of his body. And he has, I mean, he does video editing all the time. So he has this whole like setup his computer, and it just all works for him the way he's sort of rigged it all up with all his accessible kind of features and add-ons and things like that. So there's definitely different ways to make this work for different groups. And sometimes maybe it's like they don't need to make a video. Maybe we just do some sort of story sharing activities and talk about photos. And there's so many different ways to do storytelling in different communities. I'm actually working with an Alzheimer's group right now. So we're trying to develop something that would work really well for probably mid-stage kind of dementia where there's still lucid moments. But yeah.
That's awesome. And I have to say, we've already had a couple of people, Jeanette saying, please set us up, sign us up for that workshop. So it's really exciting to see people being excited about this. Yeah, I'm just, like I said, really grateful to you, Rani, not just for coming here today and presenting this information and getting people excited to tell their story and do a workshop, but also for telling your own experience with Parkinson's and being so open to talking about how your diagnosis and how you've been moving through your diagnosis and what's been helping you as well, and how storytelling is helpful. I really appreciate it. And I think with that, we are going to go ahead and wrap up. We got another one. Gretchen would love a workshop. Great idea.
Anybody has any questions about it or any concerns, or they want to know more, you know, that they don't feel like asking publicly, you can always definitely email me. I'm happy to answer any questions. It's Rani@storycentre.org. And yeah, I'll be happy to speak with you. Obviously, personally, now that I'm in this world, I would love more than anything to do a workshop with people with Parkinson's or with their, you know, caregiver, the people who care about them would be nice too. So yes.
Yeah, and I love the idea too. I think for us, we found also on our end, we started a couple initiatives this year, including a podcast, and we have found that that people really do. It is really helpful to hear people's stories of living with Parkinson's, both for people who don't have Parkinson's and for others that are living with Parkinson's. And those stories have actually, for us, been some of the most powerful work we do. So I'm very excited to keep working with you, Rani. And again, info@briangrant.org to let us know your interest in doing a story workshop. And with that, I will say goodbye to everyone. Thank you for joining us. This webcast will be recorded and online at briangrant.org/webcast. And thank you guys for joining.